I want to briefly introduce myself and my colleague. My name is Thomas Dauner. I'm a partner with BCG. I've actually spent 20 years in consulting on the auto industry, and I'm also leading our global auto business at BCG. And I'm always very happy to come to Middle East because I think it's a vibrant and very interesting auto region, but I also think it's an auto region that will undergo quite some change over the next years. I want to briefly give you an overview on what is happening around the world, and then we will detail the implications that we see over the next months and years coming to Middle East as well. And Marc, who is heading our auto business here in the region, will actually lead you in that session, or lead through that session. Maybe two more words on BCG. For the technical dimensions, we have about 90 BCG partners working in auto globally, and we have about 800 dedicated consultants in the auto space. The majority of our work at the moment is on sales and marketing activities and operational improvements, with a very strong focus on excellence topic, operational performance improvement, but also digital topics that are basically on everybody's agenda at the moment, and I'll come to that in a minute as well. We have moved away from PowerPoint, I would say. That was our key priority, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, to much more tangible work, value-oriented assignments. We have also moved away from fixed fees in many areas to variabilizing how we engage with our customers, and that is often very closely linked to topics like, we are not happy with the after-sales performance, let's push that, and part of the revenue or upside potential is then shared with the consultants working on that topic as well. Just two more words on our activities on the sales and marketing side. We're working for manufacturers, obviously, but also increasingly for large dealer groups and importers on a wide variety of topics. In the mature markets, I would say very much on performance acceleration and digital opportunities. In the more developing markets, to help them get the shift right from a very new car focused setup to a balanced, I would say more balanced setup that at least in the triad has already sort of moved into reality, where after sales is an important profit source, where loyalty and CRM is getting increasingly important, where additional profit pools are needed because new car margins are coming under pressure, and sort of how to orchestrate and manage that shift and where to set the right priorities. That's the focus in that area. And then one overarching theme that we will hear a few times today as well is changing customer demands, people being increasingly socialized with smartphones and digital applications, being increasingly part of digital ecosystems, and the question or the implications that actually arise out of that development for sales and marketing activities and retail activities. It's very interesting to see that in the US and China, that development has actually moved much faster than in Europe, obviously much faster than here in Middle East as well. We've just talked outside at the breakfast that there are intermediaries moving in, like TrueCar in the US or new car and used car platforms in China, that basically try to capture the interface between the OEM or the dealer and the customer. In China, used car business, until I would say 2 years ago, has been completely unorganized. And today there are 4 or 5 platforms in the market that basically control the entire used car business, and with that residual values, and with that after sales and parts activities sort of in second ownership cycle. And if I recall discussions that I had 2 years ago in China where we talked about that phenomenon rising, people were in the room saying, we'll see that, but it will not be a threat and it might slowly come, and it came really fast. And I think the industry needs to be prepared for those digital changes. If I look at your region here, and we'll talk a bit in more detail about it obviously as well, things have not yet moved in that direction, but I think with regulations changing, sort of regional exclusivity sort of being under threat, with people being socialized increasingly also with the new technologies, that is something that you can expect to come as well. And the core question is how will it affect your profit pools, and who are potential players that will actually increase intra-brand competition or inter-brand competition by positioning themselves as a digital intermediary sort of between the manufacturer, the dealer, and the customer. That is something in the US that people were also saying is not going to happen, because consumers want to go to the dealer or want to sort of close the deal at the dealer. There's a company called TrueCar, just started a few years ago. They are controlling today already 5% of new car sales in the US with referrals. They have fairly smart configurators, and within 24 hours they ask for quotes at the dealers for a certain model or for sort of comparable vehicles, and then push it back to the customer, and they get historic transaction data as well. So there are things happening in the market where I think it's important to put attention to, even though they might not have arrived at that magnitude yet in Middle East. That's very briefly sort of who we're working with, and some of the references that we have been active for over the last years. Let's briefly look at what is happening around the world. I mean, I've touched a few points already, and then in the second step, let's move that to Middle East, and I would suggest that Marc Dahlke will introduce himself briefly when we move to that Middle East chapter. I think the world is changing, and it's changing faster than we have seen in the past. And it's changing on multiple dimensions as well. Some of those points I've highlighted already. I mean, they're the manufacturers. I've put them at the core because for 125 years they've sort of been in control of what's happening in the industry. They are working on a broad range of new retail and wholesale offerings, be it additional services along the mobility value chain, being new format concepts, digital platforms, ecosystems, different ways of showcasing product features, and so on. And I'll come to a number of examples. Then there are large dealer groups, predominantly that development of sort of changing the way sales and marketing is done has originated in the US. If you look at some of their web pages, you get referrals. You can basically put your used car on there. You get a quote within 2 or 3 hours. You can schedule maintenance appointments online via your smartphone and so on. So there's a whole range of digital services and offerings in there. And increasingly, they are competing against the manufacturer activities because they brand it under their brand umbrella, not on the OEM umbrella. Some of them have spent a lot of money to actually push their physical/digital appearance to the next level. AutoNation, there are rumors out, the biggest dealer in the US has spent more than $300 million to actually get their digital platform and offering and CRM up to speed. So that's one dynamic that we see. And then there are a couple of service firms or related firms in the insurance space, in some of the automobile club areas that actually also try to capture part of that profit pool that is changing at the moment. There are a couple of insurance players that have introduced pay as you drive or pay how you drive insurance with an OBD2 dongle in the car. They also route into service stations for accidents and maintenance, sort of to optimize some of the premium that they're charging. And then there's a range of new players that is just emerging, purely digital, basically asset-free competitors, such as those platforms that I've just mentioned that will basically operate as intermediaries between the dealer and the customer or the manufacturer and the customer, basically with the objective to increase competition between the established players by brokering demand and supply on digital platforms. Not really arrived here yet, but if you go to China and look at the discussions that the dealers and the OEMs are having at the moment, then they see that as one of the biggest threats and changes in the industry that will seriously put profit pools for dealers and OEMs under pressure. So I think it's important, I mean, not to sort of paint everything black, but to think through what would be the response to those dynamics and what is required from an OEM perspective or a dealer perspective to actually keep that customer interface protected. And then obviously you also know that there are a couple of new entrants into the auto space, such as Tesla. I mean, they own more or less the whole distribution structure, and then there's Apple and Google with large projects on the car side, both obviously with the disruptive movement of electric vehicles and autonomous driving. Their pockets are huge. Apple has $188 billion of free cash, and what they are planning to invest, and they've already hired about 1,000 engineers, is less than a percentage of their profit. And they've disrupted the industry in the past as well. And they're thinking through new vehicle concepts, obviously, that's at the core, but also distribution concepts behind that. What is changing on the retail level? I've covered a few points already. We see a whole range of new offerings, from smartphone applications, from sort of better integration between physical and digital, much more activities on the social media side and presence, social clubs and events, more advocacy, marketing type-like activities that dealers and manufacturers are pushing, and then a whole range of new format concepts, digital showrooms, mobile touch points, new hub formats for service and repair, more inner city activities, but also car rental hubs and other things that are emerging. We've asked around the globe amongst dealers and wholesalers how they see things shifting. And basically everybody says there will be changes in the traditional formats, closer to the customer, not at the outskirts of the cities anymore, much more integrated with digital offerings as well, and also a clear observation that demand patterns and the way how customers inform themselves, configure and then basically close deals, and how they interact on the after sales and service side will change. I think it's interesting to see that one of the biggest growth drivers globally is the penetration of smartphones and tablets. I think everybody, or nearly everybody, is using them, and the sort of the trend scouts and people researching in that area basically predict that in 2-3 years down the line, nearly everybody will have their own 24/7 organization ecosystem somehow linked to a smartphone or tablet to control their hi-fi, to control their calendar, their appointments, their intermodal travel, and so on. And the question is sort of what is the piece that retail and wholesale will actually have in that game. It's one of the fastest changes that mankind has seen, but one of the fastest changes that is also applicable for retail activities. And that has implications basically across the entire customer life cycle, from generating prospects and basically getting informed to sort of managing the purchase process, to bridging the gap between sort of having made a purchase decision to get the vehicle delivered, if it's a build to order vehicle and not a stock vehicle, and then the experience during the ownership period as well, where many different touch points are emerging. Social media is extremely active. We've done a pilot project with them in Europe for volume car manufacture. We have used what you can use under their data protection regulations in terms of preferences and likings, and we've put for that brand ads and test drives and other things into Facebook, and then people talk and chat about those things, and you can generate extremely hot leads just by sort of using such a social community platform. And OEMs and dealers have actually started using those, or WeChat in China and others. And I think that's the socialization that will happen. It is much more advanced in China and the US than it is in Europe, and I think Middle East will probably follow after Europe as well. What we also see, I've mentioned that briefly, is the emergence of new retail formats along the sales funnel, obviously with different objectives. Traditional dealerships, as we all know them, I think with the objectives as we know them as well. Regional coverage, basically addressing customer needs along the entire sales and marketing funnel, from early awareness to closing a deal. Increasingly, we see test drive centers emerging to get closer to the customer and then really invite them into mobile concepts or local concepts to push more touch and feel in a world where touch and feel is increasingly being digitalized or replaced by digital experience. There are obviously brand centers. These are the big marketing-oriented locations and showrooms, mostly in metropolitan areas. They're hugely expensive usually. I mean, they don't earn the money locally. There's always a marketing piece in there, and some of the manufacturers have invested significantly in that. We also see the emergence of more local / mobile sales force, where you can actually ask for appointments. A salesperson will come to your house or to work with some digital demonstrators and configure a car with you there locally. At least in Europe and the US, a large percentage of fleet business is actually done without going to the showroom ever. In the past, you had to do that, but people don't want to do that. So mobile sales force is coming, you configure and basically close the deal at your private or business premises. Then there are obviously stationary touch points that are small inner city locations. If you go to China, you see them basically everywhere in the high-end malls, very small space, 2-3 cars on display. But not sort of the huge dealerships, just to get more traffic and interaction and touch and feel. And then everybody, I think, is experimenting with mobile touch points as well. These are basically movable setups, smart containers, often linked to test driving initiatives or so. In Europe, some of the manufacturers have basically gone through the big cities, from city to city, together with car launches, and have basically put their booth or little container things there. You could online, on the spot, register for a test drive. You get all the information and so on, and it's a physical location, but movable. And then a lot of investment is going into websites at the moment, smart configurators, different configuration logic as well. I mean, historically, you basically on a manufacturer platform, you select the car, you select the engine size, you select sort of detailed technical features. That is moving away from that more technical logic, more to lifestyle preferences. What kind of person am I? What am I doing for leisure and so on? What kind of car would fit to me? Pre-configured ways of sort of interacting in a way that's very different to the technical or engineering sort of kind of style, and that's obviously supported with mobile apps as well. Everybody is experimenting. I think at least globally, Audi and BMW are probably the most advanced, in addition to Tesla, who is experimenting as well with those different format concepts. Many things are still at the pilot stage. Some we feel will not work out financially, and I come to that in a minute. But there's a lot of change and experimenting happening in the market. Just a few quick snapshots on what we see globally. BMW has with the I models, but now also for their broader range, very strongly invested in virtual activities in the showrooms, often a combination between hardware on display and virtual appearances with interesting screens and walls, and very fancy inner city activities. They've also introduced the Product Genius, which is basically a technical explainer for the cars, very deep into all the technical topics, because they felt that whenever somebody is actually coming to the showroom in Europe or in the US, they have deep interest in really understanding the car, because the basics you can all get through the internet already. And that's the person that actually guides you around the vehicle, deeply explains all the technical features, really extremely well trained also on competitive advantages versus other cars. Why is that better than a Mercedes? Why is that better than a Lexus, etc. So very strongly focused on the personal interaction whenever somebody comes into one of those showrooms. Audi, I think you've clearly observed, has invested very strongly in a couple of pilot digital showrooms with big power walls, with very interesting display activities. You're basically standing in there. I don't know who of you has been in a London retail outlet. You're basically standing in a virtual world. You can configure on the tablet. You see it immediately on the world. It's pretty interesting. I think it's a good experience. Very different to traditional sort of car buying and getting informed, but it's also extremely expensive on the technical hardware side, and that hardware is outdated in a 3-year cycle. So it comes with huge capex for the dealers and is potentially not sustainable as a model in the future. The way it works is you have those huge power walls on which you basically see your configured vehicle. You can actually configure something on the internet, save it, go to the dealer, load it up on the screen so that what you've done at home is already in there. There are touch configurations, easy to operate. It's basically large iPads where you move things around. And then there is still touch and feel, which the dealers can choose, and you can sort of give giveaways, a small leather piece or other things to the customers so that they don't only have a virtual view, but also take something with them. Aston Martin, I think is moving away a bit from it's the car to it's a luxury world and a luxury environment. They've opened a couple of shops with only one car in there and a lot of lifestyle and premium around it. It's also interesting that at least in Europe, those dealers have to organize at least 10 to 15 events per month where customers are being invited, where test drive activities are being organized, where they cook together with a chef and other things. So it's a lot around community building, or not only selling vehicles. And then Tesla, I'm sure you've all observed. I think they are at the forefront of experimenting with a full range of format concepts. They have a direct sales model. They own and operate most of their activities, and they have mobile pop-up stores that are basically moving around the cities. They have obviously the brand stores, many of them also in inner city locations. Mobile product specialists that go around from event to event, and then they have very creative options also for after sales side with pickup services where your vehicle actually gets picked up by a Tesla Ranger and then will be brought back to your house, or obviously larger brick and mortar service centers where customers go and actually bring the car there. Two basically general showroom concepts, the brand boutiques, no service, often even no test driving, touch and feel, 2 or 3 cars in there, usually also a technical display, just the chassis where you see how the engine and the electrical motors are positioned in the batteries. And then the second one is the larger concept with a combination of brand boutique and outlet and services. Up until now, they have basically not engaged any franchise partners or cooperation partners and are sort of pushing it themselves. And the main reason behind that is that they say we don't want to be exposed to pressure on our prices and our margins, and we want to control that basically ourselves. Just 2, 3 more highlights, and then we move to Middle East, sort of to round up what's happening around the world. Given that things are getting more digital, I think there is a inherent need also for sort of real life touch and feel. Range Rover has invested in a visitor center directly at the plant. If you buy a car, even in Germany, you can choose to actually pick it up in the UK. You get a brand tour and so on. So with all those digital things that are happening, I think there is still some urge and need to touch it, to see where it's produced. So I think the combination in the end is what really makes a difference. Then I mentioned already, it's not only format concepts and sort of digital physical integration, it's also the way how products are being displayed, the way how consumers can actually get information. There are interactive walls at BMW, for example. You can basically look at something and with a Bluetooth connection you can get it on your smartphone, and you can get additional data, so you can basically link what you do at the dealer to your own ecosystem and your personal smartphone world. And then there are other things that Mercedes is experimenting on, where you have QR codes, for example, on all the test cars. You get information already there. When you put your smartphone there, you get information about the launches, about upcoming new cars, and so on. So broad range of new features and activities, all I think with an intention to increase loyalty and leverage that new digital theme of ecosystems that are emerging and that are controlling our lives. And Mercedes is probably one of the most advanced ones, also as a manufacturer, or is one of the most advanced ones as a manufacturer, to actually build that ecosystem in which dealers will be integrated, but also customers can directly link sort of to the manufacturer and the dealer with, in the next step, additional services, connected features, and so on. That in a nutshell for me is basically what is happening around the globe. Relevance of new car sales as part of the profit pool is declining. In every region, relevance of after sales as a profit pool is strongly increasing. Need for control of the used car business is increasingly important because it drives residual values, and you don't want anybody somewhere outside, I would say in the desert, to define those used car prices. So dealers have invested strongly, and retailers and OEMs, to basically get control over the entire sales and marketing value chain and integrate that in the digital world. I think it's important not to run after each and every new thing, because some of them will be financially or economically very challenging. Therefore, it's very critical to understand what is happening, but then apply it to region-specific dynamics, and clearly understand sort of along a couple of dimensions whether those new developments are applicable in your specific context. For financial reasons, economic effectiveness, for marketing effectiveness, but also for operational effectiveness. We are helping a number of manufacturers and dealer groups to actually think through those dynamics, not to invest in the wrong areas, to get the balance right between sort of traditional way of doing business, but sort of having the new things in there as well, particularly helping them to think through their digital transformation, and also the allocation of topics and tasks between the manufacturers and the dealers, to actually strike the right balance. That in a nutshell is sort of what is happening around the globe. If you have immediate questions, please ask them. Otherwise, we would also have time for Q&A after Marc's presentation on sort of what is happening in the region.
First, a brief introduction. Marc Dahlke. I'm now more than 10 years in the consulting space. Before I was a lawyer, and then decided to do something less serious, and became a consultant, then moved to the Middle East 4 to 5 years ago, and heading here our automotive business, and both for OEMs and with the large family groups, so the dealerships and distributors. We are covering all kinds of topics, of course, mostly strategic topics, but at the same time operational topics when it comes to showroom excellence and after-sales improvements. Maybe just one question up front, because it's not perfectly clear for me. How many representatives of OEMs do we have in the room today? Really for the OEM regional headquarters. Okay, so the rest is from dealers and distributors, I would assume. And how many are from the UAE market or based in the UAE market? Any from KSA? Okay, good. Any other regions which I have not? Europe. Okay, good. So I think, I mean, overall the outlook for the Middle East market sounds good. I mean, it's still growing, 4 to 7%. Growth rates is what we are expecting. We're expecting by 2020 still that KSA will hit the 1 million new vehicle sales. And of course, we are already experiencing worldwide the first requests for analyzing the Iranian market, which will also add to the attractiveness of the overall region when it comes to new vehicle sales. So that's the good news. On the other hand side, of course, what we have seen is that the Middle East region is coming increasingly into the focus of all OEMs, also the ones who are not that strong here historically. So there will be an intensifying competition, or it is already on, but will also come. If you look at all the announcements of the different OEMs and brands, what the volume targets and new vehicle sales are for the upcoming years, probably the market would need to be of double size even if everybody wanted to achieve his or her targets. So this is why we believe, I mean, on the one hand side, what Thomas already said, I think thinking about additional profit pools is key for at least a profitable business here, but at the same time, of course, capturing as much of the opportunity in the new vehicle sales is another one, and there it's basically about differentiation. And I liked in the first section this slide because I think this is the future. This is also the future here in the region if you think about the affinity of people in the region to social media, to their PDAs. And if maybe you are doing your internal check, what of this you are hitting today, I would assume that still the hit rate is rather low. And this is also what we are experiencing during our projects when we are doing mystery shopping and the surveys for our clients, that of course this is something which is very low right now. So here it's still the traditional retail business, sometimes even more an order taking which happens in the showrooms. And probably it's about who will be or who can be the first mover or first movers to really leverage these means for a retail and capture more market share on the new vehicle sales. So we have tried to summarize a little bit what are the observed trends which will impact also auto retail in the Middle East. The first one, of course, is the intensifying competition I was mentioning. Customers waking up, we call it like that. So it's a little bit a shift of customer preferences. It's not only about price anymore. It's really about customer experience, which the people here in the region want to have. Then, of course, it's the rapid move to digital. We will have a deep dive on that. Then you are facing some government intervention. It's not only CAFE, but it's also maybe the competition law, which will be more enforced in the region, which will then allow to have cross-border deliveries of cars. We're experiencing still that whenever there's some kind of gray import, very often the OEM is called, and then basically the markets are reset again. But this can obviously change in the future, and will then also, maybe through platforms like TrueCar, which Thomas mentioned, put another pressure on the retail margins, and even more than put pressure on dealers to find other profit pools. And then, of course, the consumer protection and generally the government interest in understanding how satisfied the customers are is also putting additional pressure, also for investments. And then, as we see, some dealers are not up to par, we would say, if you look at international benchmarks and at what we are expecting here for the region. So maybe let's go, I mean, first of all, does this somehow resonate with you? Would you add some other headlines which are basically challenging your business today, or is this pretty much what you're also perceiving in your day-to-day business? Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think this is where you could subsume it under, yeah, it's a good point. It's probably under the intensifying competition, which requires thinking about the entire value chain, but also the buyer decision, because today the buyers are thinking very much, this is what our research has shown, about when I'm replacing my car in 3 to 4 to 5 years, will I still have the same residual value as another brand? And definitely you have some incumbent brands here where the residual values are very high, but then some, very often we are quite surprised as Europeans, European top brands very often have a lower residual value as you would expect, which also depends very much which dealer network an OEM was able to capture in the different markets. There's different reputation, but also a question of how to position from the beginning the entire after-sales value chain. Good point.
Can you elaborate on the third point, never before see change expected?
yeah, I mean, in the end of the day, we see that there's a particular dynamic now in these years. I mean, a very good example is also if you look into KSA. I mean, there are increased efforts by the OEM to establish national sales companies or something like a national sales company. So the OEM is really, or the OEMs are really engaging more. We also see this like many of the OEM regional headquarters are hiring these days and also organizationally putting a particular focus on KSA. So there's a shift of the traditional thing where you had rather small regional headquarters of the OEMs, and the businesses was more left to the distributors in the different markets. So the attention is just higher internationally or from an OEM view on the market and the region. Doesn't matter. So yeah, what we basically see is that the incumbents are more or less trying to defend their market share, which is clear, and I think everybody knows whom I'm talking about when I'm talking about the incumbent, while let's say the mid-market in terms of market share positioned OEMs are trying to stay there, and you have small players, to date small players who are trying to capture more of the market. I mean, if you look at Volkswagen in KSA has a market share of below 1%, you understand why Volkswagen was establishing a national sales company in KSA, and of course they are pushing from the bottom. They will push from the bottom. CAFE may help particularly the European OEMs to get an advantageous position in the market. So there will be a lot of movement and a lot of competition in the market, and then, as I said, decreasing the retail margins, which are for new vehicle sales, which are really high if you compare to other markets, as you all probably know, which are already under pressure and which will require to really think about the entire value chain. So this order taking is not happening anymore as it was in the past. So customers waking up, maybe just here quite interesting research. This one is just picked from Qatar. We asked consumers about their overall satisfaction with dealer performance. And you can see here that the dealer satisfaction, and the red one or the dotted one in red is basically for regular average, and the blue one is for luxury average. And you see that the overall satisfaction is rather low. Maybe some of you also know the survey which was run by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry in Saudi Arabia about dealer performance and dealer satisfaction, which was also very low, even with the incumbent and OEMs or dealers which have the large market share in the market. Even there, the satisfaction, if you ask the consumers, was rather low. Particularly, as you can see, professionalism and competence of salesmen was pointed out, and the courtesy and the willingness of salesmen. So this is very much about the showroom experience. So again, I'm going back to this one. Thinking about a mobile sales force is really, so where really the salesmen come to the customer when they know that the customer wants to buy a car, could be something completely revolutionary for this market, because to date the customer experience once you enter the showroom is perceived, at least by most of the consumers, rather low. And I don't know how many of you are doing this on a regular basis, but to have some kind of mystery shopping on the one hand side for your own showrooms, and on the other hand side really have these customer service about the showroom experience, the sales experience, the after-sales experience is extremely valuable and should be done, in our view, on a regular basis. And again, coming to the digital, can be done quite easily today with social media as well, or at least with apps, which maybe you can use for this purpose. Yeah, shifts in buyers' preferences. I mean, again, I already said that I would have expected that particularly the cheap and traditional and personalized and economical would score high. They score high in other markets, They scored high in these markets, but increasingly you have the superior handling, the powerful, the innovative, which is not only about the car, but also about how the car is brought to the consumer. This is a survey which we did during a project in Saudi Arabia. So it's very much Saudi focused, but also representative for other markets in our view. The numbers, so basically people were asked to attribute scores overall 100 to all these attributes, and then you see here the average score, which superior handling on the right hand side, powerful and innovative, received from the consumers asked. It was a sample of about 1,500 surveyed people here. Yes, and then the digital, I mean, this is in our view, and you heard that from Thomas' presentation, something to put focus on. Because, I mean, first of all, globally, we heard that digital and social media channels in automotive retail are growing in importance. On the left-hand side, you can see how important certain channels are being perceived for buyers of new vehicles, be it for a test drive of at a dealership, view the cars at the dealership. So social media or digital channels are perceived important to organize for all of this in the new vehicle buying process. And the OEMs are definitely at different stages in leveraging the different digital channels, which you can see on the right-hand side. What is the share of digital budget across the different OEMs globally, or here in Europe? And you can see that the Koreans are very much ahead here. It's the dark blue share, which you can see. And also social media in general becoming more important. This is not yet for auto retail in the Middle East. If you think about here compared to markets like UK, Netherlands, USA are also in the sample, Spain, but also in Indonesia, some emerging markets, you see that KSA has the highest Twitter penetration per country of the sample. And Saudis share much more online content than anyone else. If you look to the right-hand side, where the question was, what are you sharing? Are you sharing everything or most things online through your social media devices? So this is quite high. And also, if you look particularly at KSA, but this also applies for other Middle Eastern markets, you have a huge new consumer group, the youth, which is rising and which will buy their first cars or in the near future. And of course, they are even more affine to using digital and social media. So what we analyzed in a project was Facebook, use of Facebook by dealerships or OEMs. And I mean, I guess you all know Facebook. So you have the likes, the comments, and the shares. And of course, this can be, or these different three types can be used in auto retail. And we checked, for example, first of all, which OEMs have the most engaged followers. So for example, how many likes can you see per 10,000 followers? How many comments do you see per 10,000 followers? How many shares do you see per 10,000 followers? I mean, the likes, we all know that sometimes likes are also bought by agencies who are only then going to the websites and increase the number of likes. So you always have to be a little bit careful with these kind of numbers if you're doing the analysis. But you can see that there are huge differences. We sanitized this because we just did it for a client and we don't want to expose the numbers. But you can see that on the left-hand side, for example, in terms of likes, the US brands are in the lead and the Japanese are on the rather lower side. Then the comments, you have one Korean in the lead, then the US, and then in the end again rather at the lower end the Japanese. And then the shares where content was really shared was again the US in the lead and the Japanese at the lower end. It was quite interesting, and you see it's not yet that definitely the number of Facebook followers or their activity has to reflect the commercial success and the number of cars sold. But definitely, we believe that this will be something which will come up and will play an even more important role. So our recommendation for many of our clients here in the region is to review both from the OEM side and from the dealer side. So very often it should be connected, very often it's however separate, to develop an as customized as possible appearance in the social media and really use them proactively, market events, market new launches, market new offers which you can get in the different dealerships or in the region in certain countries, because as you can see there's a quite high activity among followers, or at least it can be high depending on how interesting the platforms are designed. Yes, and here again we were looking for the level of engagement in absolute terms, and on the right-hand side, maybe a KPI of the future, the engagement per unit sold, which you could also call like the effort, the online, the digital effort in social media, which one has to invest to sell a car. But again, I think this is still a little bit early because these concepts, particularly here in the regions, are still developing. But it's quite interesting how different you see the OEMs and the engagement, and obviously also the attractiveness of the digital offerings in social media in the region. Yeah, what we found quite interesting when we did here marketing spend analysis was that obviously overall still 50% go into television marketing and 29% into newspaper. So also here we would expect, I mean this is excluding digital here, we weren't able to get hold of the numbers for all of the OEMs, but we would expect that if you included digital here, it's still also rather marginal, but for some of the, particularly the US and the Korean OEMs, it's already taking some share of the traditional means in marketing. Yeah, government interventions we were talking about. You have CAFE, of course. You have competition law. You have consumer protection laws, which are coming, or which are emerging, which are already there. And the main message, of course, is, I mean, some of the things will need to be addressed more on an OEM level when it comes to fuel efficiency, but some of these topics can already be anticipated by the distributors and dealerships, particularly when it comes to expected margin pressure from more liberalized markets and moving more into the downstream parts of the value chain. So when it comes to premium after sales, when it comes to let's say a structured used car platform, when it comes overall to showroom experience, when it comes to transparency. I mean, one interesting observation which we have here in the region is it's really difficult to configure a car online. This is also a key message from consumers when we are surveying them. It's really difficult to get a quote from your PC or from your iPhone or from your PDA. Sometimes you can configure, but really getting a price quote up front, it's really difficult. So you have still to go to the showroom and somehow have the negotiation in the showroom. There's also across dealerships of one and the same brand, very often no MSRP, at least for some of the OEMs, what we see. And this is increasingly annoying consumers. And I think this is also a risk, because if a platform like TrueCar, for example, would come to the Middle East, then of course you would have several of these effects. The one is the increased price competition from one day to the other with very receptive consumers, because they would get the transparency which they are lacking in the past. or which they are lacking today very often at least. And at the same time, of course, this would maybe even allow inter-brand or even intra-brand competition across borders. And within the GCC, you are aware that there's basically no real customs hurdle which will make the cars more expensive when they are shipped from one market to the other. Yes, the dealers, I think we talked about it. So overall, we would say that there is some need for action, just with the sake or with the interest of time. Maybe here in the end, one more time, some kind of summary list which we have experienced in some of our latest projects, which clients are asking for. It's of course about smartphone applications, it's about an enhanced social media presence, it's about social clubs and events, it's about using modern technologies and maybe even apps in the showroom. So for example, that you can download an app once you are entering the showroom, and this app will guide you through the showroom, will allow you to scan a barcode of a car and give you all the required information about the car. It's about digitalization of the store, which is including this. Repair and service hubs, which are also supported by social media or social or digital media, which are pushing you information when there are new offers, which are pushing you information when your car is up for service. I mean, some of this already happens, but it doesn't happen across the board. Agent model, I was talking about this, and overall, I think the customer experience, we think how the handover takes place still in the region. Also here, and we saw it from some of the international examples, there's a lot room for improvement, let's put it like this, or an opportunity to differentiate. And I think this is the overall message here, to differentiate in the retail experience. There's an opportunity, maybe not for all the brands, but for the first and fast movers.